South, the series, is an audiobook production. It contains subject material not suited for a younger audience. Listener discretion is advised. South, the Pinewood High School incident, is the telling of an unfortunate soul, a young girl lost to the whims of society. We follow the story of Cassidy a Pinewood High School student, as she finds herself stumbling down a dark and dangerous path. In Allura Shores, corporations control your every thought. It is a place where governments decide where you live and who you talk to, where the best parts of humanity are stripped away, turning the innocent into the monsters we fear the most. The path of darkness is broad and inviting. A banquet of thieves ready to take all you have. Hold true to your beliefs. If you are not careful, someone will replace them with their own. In the previous chapter, Cassidy was freed from being caught by a clutch move from Jerry. While walking home, she began to think on her life and how she could begin to stop feeling useless. Before making it halfway, she was stopped by a call from none other than Jerry, ultimately deciding to offer her a ride in exchange for a drink. As the two began their journey together back to her house, Cassidy decided to open up to the older woman about what she was in the school to do and what ended up happening. Jerry, in a move that Cassidy didn't see coming, further encourages her with her explanations of corporate oversight and the power of information. Ultimately, Jerry shows her true colors, and Cassidy is left to make a choice between leaving the woman's offer on the table to seek help on her own, or deal with the woman and her trickster ways. As Cassidy sets her mind on pursuing Amber, we are about to find out what choice she decides to make. Whether or not Jerry has her best interest at heart is another question. But let's continue with the story and figure out if the choice she makes is a good one. Chapter 14. Cassidy opened her eyes the next morning and squinted. She had forgotten to close the curtains when she entered her room last night, her memory serving well enough to remember her hasty pace up the stairs in a desperate move to avoid her mother and Martha. She remembered hearing the television radiating the sounds of a romantic comedy and the washing of dishes, but that was all she cared to focus on. They didn't try to stop her, the only semblance of concern from them being a check from Martha before she left for the night. She was a sweet woman, but Cassidy knew what she was trying to do, and she didn't want to let go. It felt as though she were stepping on eggshells, the soft tiptoeing through the upstairs hallway making her feel silly. She managed to clean herself up in the bathroom and returned to her room with equal effort. She didn't know how she should begin talking to her mother. Words didn't seem appropriate in the full context of their recent interaction. She knew that she was going to have to get it over with, however, and took a deep breath while staring out of her bedroom window into the swaying pine trees. It was windy that day. Cassidy descended the stairs with the same cat-like caution and stopped when she reached the foyer. She didn't notice it before, but in the moment that she decided to listen to the house, she smelled a wonderful aroma. It was the smell of bread frying in a pan with butter. An accompanying patter of something boiling on a stove made her mind wander as to what the invigorating stimuli was. She decided to take another sniff at the air, a longer inhale than before, as though she were a connoisseur. She caught the faint hint and, in an instant, she knew what was being made. She stepped towards the kitchen while leaving her caution near the front door. There would be no need for it where she was going. "Oh, Cassidy," Martha said with her back to her as she continued with the meal she was preparing. "I didn't expect for you to be up right now. It's almost time for food. Come sit down and we'll chat, okay?" Cassidy was not in the mood for a conversation, but her stubborn nature was silenced by the growling of her stomach, almost like the cowering of a mutt to the warnings of a wolf. It didn't take Martha long to get finished with the meal, grilled cheese and onions on fresh bread with a tomato soup that Cassidy could swear had coconut milk in it. She went to take a few bites of the food, but Martha stopped her. Cassidy looked at the woman and instantly knew what she was going to say. Without wanting to upset the only person taking care of them at the moment, she complied and waited for Martha to say the prayer over the food. When grace was given, Cassidy began to scoff down the meal, not in an attempt to avoid the impending conversation, rather because the food was so good. "Slow down, Cassidy." Martha felt a bit flattered at how much the girl was enjoying her food. "Be careful with the soup. You'll burn your tongue." They continued to eat until the meal was done, Cassidy slowing her eating, but not by much. She was enjoying the normality of it all. The world outside was horrid and filled with liars, but in that moment she was safe. She finished her soup and went for a second sandwich, the taste of it keeping her in the moment just a while longer, until, without warning, it was consumed and she was back to sitting in the mess of reality. "I assumed that you liked it." Martha gave a fair smile. Cassidy nodded and got herself prepared to go back to her room. Before she could stand, however, Martha called to her. She was trapped. No escape from the list of questions she was sure the woman had for her seemed possible in the moment. She was grateful to Martha for making the food, but was that enough for her to give up all that she was trying to hide? It wasn't, and Cassidy locked the memory of the previous night's events in the back of her mind. "Your mother had to go to a few appointments this morning, and I took her," Martha began. "She wasn't feeling very well, so she's in her room trying to get over a bug. I'm going to take her some food in a bit, but since you're here, I'd like to talk to you." "We can talk later," Cassidy said hurriedly as she attempted to dart from her seat. "Sit down, Cassidy." Martha's voice was stiff. Cassidy, without knowing why exactly, obeyed and let go of all other ideas of escaping the serious woman. It was in her eyes. The old Christian sitting in front of her seemed to be a person from a different time. She was sturdy and confident with her words, something Cassidy envied greatly. She didn't dress like any woman she knew. No t-shirts or loose articles distracting from the simple palette that brightened the room. She was someone that you would feel comfortable enough with to care for a loved one, a point that she was sure Arthur took into consideration before he left. "You gave me and everyone else quite a start, Cassidy," Martha continued the conversation. "You've been darting in and out without saying anything to anyone, and we're worried." "I'm good." Cassidy stopped herself too late. I'm okay, Miss Jacobs." "No, you're not." Cassidy felt a pang of embarrassment as she decided to look behind Martha. One of the cabinets was slightly ajar. "I want to tell you how me and your mother came to meet. It was before you were born, actually. Your mom was good friends with my daughter. Both of them grew up in Pinewood, and we all went to the same church. You know that your grandmother died while Sandra was young, but your grandfather was as devout as they come. Your mother was like you know. She began pulling away from the church at that age, too. It wasn't until she met your father that she came back and rededicated herself to Christ. What is it with men and dragging us women folk to church?" Cassidy looked towards the front room where a mantel near the television was and looked at a picture of her mother. "Anyway, to answer my own question, Sandra found out what happened to Christina, and when Christy died, I was beside myself. Sandra came to help me when I needed it and became another daughter to me. When I heard about what happened to Mark, I had to come help. It broke her though, and, well, it took until the other week for me to finally get here. I didn't want to lose another daughter. I came here because I love her. I love you too, Cassidy." Cassidy was looking at her again, a strangeness settling between them. She wanted to say something to her, but the words didn't come. She had grown up without a grandmother and didn't know what having one meant, but she was sure that Martha would fit the role well. Martha stood from the table and approached her so smoothly that she barely noticed, leaning towards her and planting a kiss on her forehead before holding her cheek with an open palm. Cassidy must have been blushing because, after returning upright and retrieving her plate, Martha looked at her with an impossible smile. Cassidy watched her grandmother walk back into the kitchen to clean the dishes and retreated into her mind. Before any real thought could come to her, however, the entire moment was upended when the doorbell rang. "Your mom didn't say anything about a guest coming today," Martha said from the kitchen. The sound of dishes being dropped into the sink preceded the older woman's march towards the front door. Cassidy sat in silence as she waited for Martha to return, the woman's quiet footsteps softly tapping against the hard floors of the home. When her caretaker had made it far enough away from her, she considered what she would say to her when she returned, although she were trying her best to be as discreet as possible especially now that she was working with a dangerous person like Jerry. She wanted the burden off her chest. As she continued to ponder how she would continue with Martha, she heard a growing argument at the door, and her stomach tightened. It was in the odd tonal breathing that gave who it was away. The way the woman grunted at Martha as she forced herself into her home sent Cassidy's thoughts spiraling. For as much effort as Martha gave to the cause, the older woman was quickly overpowered and made to follow behind the haughty reporter as she made her way to Cassidy. She didn't have much time to react before she was staring directly into Kimberly's sharp eyes. Her pronounced Asian features were in stark contrast to Amber's Anglo-Saxon ones, a topic they frequently liked to tease each other on when times were simple. Kimberly didn't speak at first, choosing instead to place her hands on her hips to observe the weakened teen. "Kim, who do you think you are?" Kimberly was rightfully angry. "Avoiding me like you and Amber weren't good friends?" "I'm looking for her, Cassidy, and you're sitting here like she wasn't kidnapped." "Okay, Miss Long, you need to leave." Martha had finally caught up with the angered woman. It wasn't like she wanted to avoid Kimberly, but Cassidy didn't know what to tell her. What could she say to her, the one who attacked her family member, who then witnessed that same family member being taken against their will? She had felt so helpless in the face of everything going on, and it didn't help that Amber had told her so many things just before it happened. Who could she trust? Where could she go? Those questions burned into her mind since the incident occurred. As if to sense her inner tempest, Kimberly forced a sigh to calm herself and centered her breathing. "I saw what you did to Amber. I was upset that you two fought, and I was going to press charges against you out of anger, but she told me to drop it. I'm still angry. I don't know what's going on between you two, but I need to find her, Cassidy. You saw everything that happened, and I need something to go off of if I'm going to look into it myself. I can't do it on my own, Cassidy. Will you help me?" Cassidy looked off to the side for a moment and thought about Kimberly's words. She figured that, given everything that had happened, it was a small inconvenience to give the reporter what she wanted. She looked back at Martha and nodded, the older woman releasing a sigh before returning to the kitchen to clean, as Kimberly made herself comfortable in the seat next to her. Kimberly retrieved her phone, and Cassidy assumed she pulled up a note-taking app before focusing her attention directly on her. "It's been a while since we sat down together, Cass. Do you remember what I taught you about journaling?" Cassidy nodded. "The same principles apply here. I'm going to help guide you through what happened that night. I need you to think about everything you sensed going into that store, before you got there, and what you picked up along the way, to the last thing you noticed. Don't worry, I'm not mentioning you in anything I publish, so tell me anything you can." They sat there for the better part of an hour and a half, going through everything Cassidy could remember about that chilly October morning. She told Kimberly about the driver and the conversation they had, the conversation her and Amber had when they met, and the last thing they did before Amber left the store to flag down the rideshare. Kimberly didn't flinch when Cassidy mentioned how Amber brought up her adoption and the blonde's stance on her and Kimberly's relationship. The only thing that Kimberly seemed to care about was piecing together the story, something that Cassidy felt herself warming up to. "I'm sorry that you were attacked like that, Cassidy." Kimberly was presented with a cup of lemonade from Martha when she brought one to Cassidy. "And you said that you thought one of the kidnappers looked familiar?" "Yeah." Cassidy looked away from her to search her thoughts. "He had the same frame as that guy Amber said she stabbed a while ago." "Do you remember what the guy's name was or what he might have looked like?" Kimberly was still typing something in her phone. Cassidy pulled out her phone and got on Hunter. She scrolled through the app for a bit before coming across Amber's profile. She paused a moment before committing to the research, sliding through her sister's wild posts before coming across one that she recognized. It was a picture of Amber at the party she was supposed to go with her to. In it was Amber with her arms around Mandy Watkins. They were standing in front of someone who she recognized instantly as the guy who threatened her a while ago when she tried to get Amber away from him. "This guy." Cassidy handed her phone over to Kimberly. "I think his name is Chris. Amber said that they had a fight and she stabbed him." Kimberly took a moment to commit the man's face to memory before releasing another sigh. Cassidy could see it on her face. The heartache at seeing Amber's cheerful face was a shared pain between them. A moment passed before Kimberly handed Cassidy her phone back, and the two sat in silence a moment, Kimberly reaching for a familiar silver pendant on her neck to fondle it lightly while thumbing her phone in the other hand. She finished making some notes before replacing her phone in her pocket and looking around at the home. "We weren't always at odds, you know," Kimberly seemed to be confessing to her. "Amber was a little girl when she became my sister. I was a teenager and, well, you know how teenagers can be. As time went on, we became closer, but we were always at a distance thanks to school and my career. I think about her needing me and I begin feeling neglectful." "Cassidy, I love my sister, even if she can be wild at times. I will find her. But do me a favor." Cassidy nodded again, while wiping tears from her face. "Don't give up, okay?" Kimberly stood and began to walk away. Cassidy chose to remain seated and allowed her emotions to pass as the reporter left. Her sniffling cued Martha to return to her with tissues as Amber's sister left the home without any other interaction. It took a while for her to calm herself, and later, while in her room, Cassidy's mind wandered back to how focused Kimberly was. For all of Amber's grandstanding against her relationship with Kimberly and their mother, the rebellious girl was surrounded by people who loved her more than she could realize. An anger swelled in her at the thought, and she punched her pillow. "Where are you, Amber?" The warm amber glow of the setting sun helped Cassidy maintain her grip of time as she lay in her bed with her phone in her hand. With each swipe, she was led through the library of souls she felt addicted to. So many people willing to share their waking moments, all for the attention of people they would never meet. People willing to judge and ridicule at the drop of a hat. She would frequently do the same in a vain attempt for the sympathy of her peers, but not that time. She was searching for something else in the cacophony of liars and porn addicts. She was looking for her best friend. She started with Amber's friends pages, each one of them featuring model-like veneers and the same expressions with their focus centered at her. They were copies of the same person with different names, clones manufactured by the same companies responsible for the rise in loneliness and despair. Her search took her from page to page and back again until she found herself gazing at the one profile she didn't want to explore. She was about to click on the equestrian's page, but she stopped herself. Not yet. Cassidy swallowed her guilt as she surfed back to Amber's profile. When she was halfway through an apology post from Mandy Watkins to Deborah Hughes for forgetting about her birthday, Cassidy followed one of Deborah's other posts to a website dealing with victims of human trafficking. She wanted to turn away and continue her search, but she began to feel something pulling at her chest when she saw a audio playing as she scrolled. The woman that was featured looked almost like Amber. Her hair was a different color, but they had the same eyes, a sadness hidden behind a mask of smiles and nervous chuckles. She wiped her eyes before moving on to James's profile. The sports enthusiast had recently posted a video of one of his training sessions, and she thought about calling him before remembering their argument. Cassidy decided to take a break before going back through her phone, her mind dancing with the many lives of the people she wanted to swap places with. Their lives were so much better than her own, even if only a lie. They presented themselves so well online that she believed nearly every post. When she returned to her deep dive into the internet after readying herself for bed, she decided to take the deepest plunge and clicked on Jessica's profile. To her shock, the girl hadn't posted since a few days after they were brought in for questioning by the police. Her last post, although brief, was stark in contrast to the way Cassidy assumed she would post. Hey friends, Jess here. I'll be taking a break from the noise to go live with my dad. Thanks for the many messages, but I'm doing fine. Don't worry, friends. I'll be okay. Cassidy paused as she read the post and wondered to herself what must have been going through Jessica's mind as she posted that. It didn't seem right to her, the way how she was willing to disappear from her life like that, but she was sure that it was the right call. Even thinking about that night sent shivers through her, the taste of the horse's blood on her tongue as she allowed herself to be taken by Leander. Before she clicked off, Cassidy sent a final message to her and tossed her phone onto the bed beside her. Cassidy lay on her back and looked at the ceiling of her room. She often complained that her room felt bland and without expression, but she didn't want to go crazy with the decor like Arthur did. She wondered what the other witches were up to, and if Heather and Penelope were willing to forgive her for her outburst. She thought about what Jerry had proposed to her, and whether or not it was a deal that she should have taken. Regardless, she had what she was after. There were people taking Amber's abduction serious, and she was joining the fray. She looked at her phone a little and reached for it, her fingers moving through her contacts until reaching Penelope's name. Before she could press the call button, however, another call came through and blocked her attempt. "Hello?" Cassidy had sounded more anxious than she wanted. "I have a lead for you." Jerry didn't hesitate to get into the meat of the conversation. "There's a meeting happening in downtown Pinewood later tonight on the pier. Your witch mother is meeting the woman you were talking about before, Elizabeth Shaw." Cassidy's heart sank when she heard the name. This was it. She was going to get more answers from the two suspects in her investigation. The thoughts of doubt that she was harboring for Jerry had lifted slightly as she was given the news. The woman was coming through with her promise, and Cassidy was not going to squander the opportunity. She sat herself up on the edge of the bed and began to look for clothes to wear. "The plan is simple, Cassidy." Jerry was driving. "Go to where they're meeting and record anything you can. If we're going to expose anything that's been going on with your coven and the company, we'll need anything they're willing to divulge." "How?" Cassidy decided to ask, but was cut off. "The time for questions is over, kid." Jerry stopped her car. "If you don't want this, let me know now. Information moves at the speed of light, and I don't have time to deal with your insecurities. You in or not?" Cassidy made a face upon hearing that and thought back to their conversation in the car. She knew that the woman was going to benefit from this somehow, but did that really matter? She was after Amber and her kidnappers after all. Surely the choice she made to enter Jerry's service was the best one she could have made. But then she thought about how committed Kimberly was in her efforts as well. They were both fighting for the same thing, and Cassidy was sure Kimberly was making questionable deals to get what she wanted as well. "Yeah, I'm still in," Cassidy uttered without fully thinking it through. "I'm sending a ride share to you in an hour." Jerry was driving again. "Get off where they drop you off at and follow the pier to the fish restaurant on the docks. Call me when you get there." The call ended without any other interaction, and Cassidy was left to condense her thinking to one main objective. She dressed in dark attire. She was going to a restaurant of all places, so she didn't want to look weird or out of place. She followed the tips she got from the girls when they visited before and managed to piece together a decent outfit. A black sweater that loosened at the shoulders, gray jeans, and the black boots that her mom forgot were hers. She wanted to look a bit older than she was, so she snuck out of her room and into her mother's, making sure that she wasn't in there before hurrying over to the dresser she kept her jewelry in. Cassidy managed to sneak a pair of earrings and matching necklace from the wooden box that hadn't been touched since her father died. Before leaving, she looked at herself in the nearby standing mirror and paused at her appearance. There was no mistaking that she was Sandra's daughter, her look inspiring a quick posture check before leaving the image behind. As she turned and prepared to leave the near barren room, she was startled by none other than her mother, the older woman looking a bit worn from worry and medications. "Mom," Cassidy barely got a reaction from her. "I was just checking how I looked in these and—" "You look like me." Sandra gave a weak chuckle. "Come here. Let me fix your hair." Her mother paced herself towards the reflection of her younger self and motioned for Cassidy to sit on the edge of the bed. She didn't want to at first, Her mind centered on the time that her ride was going to appear, but she relented, if at least to ease her mother's worrying a little. The process didn't take too long, Sandra styling her hair in a quick bun that she could have done herself, and, when finished, let her daughter look at herself in the mirror as she stood to the side. They stood and admired their resemblance for a good moment before Sandra began to wipe her face of a few tears. Cassidy wanted to share in the emotions, but she had seemed to have lost them in the chaos of her life. As she watched her mother collect herself, Cassidy focused on her reflection and allowed her confirmation to reach the other part of her that was still apprehensive to taking on the burden she placed on herself. When she had managed to free herself of the pain, Sandra placed her hands on Cassidy and closed her eyes. "I'm sorry, Cassidy," she began. "I feel like I forced you to do so much for me while I grieved your father. I expected for you to be there for me forever, but I know now that I can't keep you from making your own choices in life. I only wanted you to live a happy life. The only way I knew how to give you that was through the church, but I failed my test. I felt like it was my fault that you were hurting, and I'm sorry, baby." "Mom," Cassidy wanted to say something that would reassure her, but nothing came to mind. Sandra removed her hands from Cassidy and walked over to her side of the bed, sitting on the edge before pulling back the covers and lying down. Cassidy, after watching her do so, walked to her bedside and helped by tucking her in. When the task was complete, Sandra reached for her hand and Cassidy allowed her to take it. They remained that way for a moment until Cassidy's phone chimed. Her ride was outside. "You made your choices," Sandra responded after noticing Cassidy's anxious move to check the message. "I won't get in your way anymore, okay? You do what you feel is right. And don't let me keep you from making your own decisions. You can always come back home if you need to, okay?" Sandra reached up and placed her hand on her daughter's cheek. "You look so pretty, Cassidy. Be safe. I love you." Cassidy looked on at her mother and, for a moment, lost herself on how peaceful she looked. It was confusing. She had prepared herself for a fight that was not happening, a conflict that she was sure was going to tear the two apart for a good long while. But there was nothing. She left Sandra to her rest and exited the home, entering the awaiting sedan that was waiting at the edge of the driveway to take her downtown. The ride went smooth enough, but the conversation she had with her mother remained. It pulled at her thoughts as they entered Pinewood and made her scratch her head when they reached the busy stretch of road that led to the pier. When the car pulled up to the stop she was to start walking from, Cassidy hesitated again before getting out. Was she mad at her? Did she miss some cue that was secretly given with her eyes? Why was she willing to let her go without giving her so much as a question to where she was going? Cassidy stared into nothing as she pondered the occurrence until, without realizing that she was being spoken to, snapped back to the interior of the car. Hey, come on, honey. The woman that was driving her finally got her attention. You gotta get out. I have other rides to make. Sorry, Cassidy said as she got out without stalling any longer. Cassidy made her way from the main road onto the stretch of brick that led to the pier's entrance. The darkness of night concealed her anxiety well enough for her to blend in with the rest of the night walkers, silhouettes mimicking human movements pacing around her in all directions. The smell of salt water wafted off of the dancing pitch that churned to her right as the brick gave way to wood, her stable footfalls gaining a hollow overtone as the ground was replaced by buoyance. She was nearing the restaurant on the docks, a well-lit beacon amongst the backdrop of downtown Slayton on the opposite shore. As she drew closer, Cassidy followed closely behind a couple carrying 3 children, her gaze falling on a familiar woman standing outside of the building while taking a call. Lydia. Cassidy turned away from the family and stayed near a parked boat that had its lights off. She watched the witch continue pacing back and forth while expressing disapproval to whomever was on the other end of the call, a side of the woman that Cassidy had become increasingly used to. Not too long after shouting something about not losing another one, she was approached by another woman, the woman that they were both there for. Elizabeth didn't engage with Lydia the way someone would normally do when first meeting them, the callous woman choosing to walk past her while Lydia followed obediently. This was it. She was going to find out what they knew and expose the truth once and for all, even if it killed her. It looks like Cassidy has made up her mind and is ready to get to the bottom of what is happening around her. We can only hope that her efforts work smoothly. Thanks everyone for listening to South, the Pinewood High School incident. I would like to give a special thanks to Ministry in Christ Church for everything God has led you to accomplish over the years. Go to ministryinChristchurch.com to find more information. You can also find us on Facebook by searching Ministry in Christ Church. A big thanks to John at Tale of the Manticore for his creativity in the podcasting space. Listen to Tale of the Manticore podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Remember to leave a comment about anything you would like to talk about on Podbean, Google Podcast, or X at The Writer Wesley. I check my comments regularly, so feel free to type away. If you would like for me to announce what you are currently working on, feel free to message me on X as well. I am looking for anyone with a passion for what they do so that I can represent you in your efforts. With that said, sit tight, get ready, because the next chapter is going to be the last of the 5 chapters slated for the year. And then after that, I'm going to go and finish the last 5 chapters. Remember though, your mind is the battlefield. Be careful to which side you give aid. See you next time.